The dusty wind carried the scent of dry earth and desperation, as Daniel Keller stood at the edge of his wheat fields, watching the golden stalks bend and sway under the relentless Dakota sun, knowing that without help, everything he had built over the past 5 years would wither and die before he could bring it in. It was August of 1883, and Hill City, South Dakota, had never seen a summer quite like this one. The heat had driven away most of the seasonal workers who usually drifted through town looking for harvest work, and those who remained had already been scooped up by the larger ranches that could afford to pay premium wages. Daniel ran a calloused hand through his dark hair, squinting against the glare as he surveyed the 100 acres that represented every penny he had, every drop of sweat, every dream he had carried west from Pennsylvania after his parents passed. He was 26 years old and facing ruin. The walk back to his modest farmhouse felt longer than usual, each step heavy with the weight of impossible decisions. He could try to bring in the harvest alone, but that would take weeks, maybe longer, and the wheat would be past its prime. He could take out a loan to hire workers at the inflated rates, but that would put him in debt for years. Or he could watch his crop rot in the fields and lose everything. None of these options sat well with him. Daniel had just stepped onto his porch when he heard the sound of a wagon approaching. He turned to see Doc Hensley's buggy kicking up dust on the road, moving faster than the old physician usually traveled. Something was wrong. The doctor pulled up hard, his gray mare snorting and tossing her head. "Daniel, thank God you're here. I need your help." "What's happened?" "There's been an accident at the old Peterson place. A woman, traveling alone, her wagon threw a wheel and she's hurt. I've got her stabilized, but she needs a place to stay while she heals. The boarding house is full up with those railroad surveyors, and I can't keep her at my office." Daniel felt his jaw tighten. He barely had enough food laid by for himself, let alone a guest. "Doc, I don't know if I'm the right person. I'm about to lose everything if I can't get help with the harvest. Please, Daniel, she's got nowhere else to go. Her family sent her out here to stay with her cousin, but the cousin moved to Montana Territory 6 months ago and nobody told her. She's stranded, hurt, and alone." Doc Hensley's weathered face showed genuine concern. "She's a good woman, educated, strong from what I can tell despite the injury." Daniel closed his eyes briefly, then nodded. What else could he do? His mother had raised him better than to turn away someone in need, even if his own situation was dire. "Bring her here. I'll make room." An hour later, Daniel watched as Doc Hensley helped a young woman down from the buggy. She moved carefully, favoring her left side, one arm wrapped in a sling. But what struck him most was her face. Even pale with pain and exhaustion, she was beautiful, with auburn hair that caught the sunlight and green eyes that took in everything around her with sharp intelligence. She wore a simple traveling dress, dusty from the road, and carried herself with a dignity that seemed at odds with her circumstances. "Miss Katherine Emerson, this is Daniel Keller. He's kindly agreed to let you stay here while you recover," Doc Hensley said. Katherine looked at Daniel directly, meeting his eyes without flinching. "Thank you, Mr. Keller. I know this must be an imposition. I'll try not to be any trouble, and as soon as I'm able, I'll work to earn my keep." Her voice was clear and steady despite the obvious pain she was in. Daniel found himself nodding. "Let's just get you inside and settled first. We can worry about the rest later." The doctor had explained that Katherine had a badly sprained wrist and severe bruising along her ribs from being thrown when her wagon overturned. Nothing broken, mercifully, but she would need at least a week or two of rest before attempting any kind of physical work. Daniel showed her to his small spare room. It was plain but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk for storage. "I'm sorry it's not much," he said. "It's more than I had an hour ago," Katherine replied, lowering herself carefully onto the bed. "I'm grateful, truly." After Doc Hensley left, Daniel stood in his kitchen, staring at his meager supplies and wondering what he had gotten himself into. He had 1 can of beans, some cornmeal, a bit of bacon, and not much else. He would need to go into town and put more food on credit, adding to the debt that was already keeping him up at night. He made a simple supper of cornbread and bacon, then brought a plate to Catherine's room. She was sitting up in bed, looking out the small window at the wheat fields beyond. "Those are beautiful fields," she said as he entered. "The wheat looks nearly ready." "It is ready. That's part of the problem." Daniel set the plate down on the trunk. "I don't have the hands to bring it in." Katherine turned to look at him, her green eyes curious. "What happened to your usual crew?" "Never had a usual crew. I've managed on my own mostly, hiring day workers when I needed them. But this year, everyone's gone to the bigger operations. I've been to town 3 times this week, and there's nobody left to hire." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I grew up on a farm in Ohio. I know harvest work." Daniel shook his head. "You're hurt. Doc said you need to rest." "Doc said I need to rest my wrist and not strain my ribs. He didn't say I had to lie in bed like an invalid." Her chin came up slightly, a stubborn set to her jaw. "When do you plan to start, Miss Emerson?" "Katherine, please." "Katherine, I appreciate the offer, but you can barely move without wincing. I can't ask you to work in your condition." "You're not asking. I'm offering." She picked up the fork with her good hand and took a bite of cornbread. "This is good. My mother made cornbread like this." Daniel found himself at a loss for words. He had expected her to be helpless, someone he would need to care for while his own world fell apart. Instead, she was offering to help him, even injured and stranded as she was. "Why?" he finally asked. "Because you took me in when you didn't have to. Because I can see in your eyes that you're desperate, even if you're too proud to say it. And because I have nowhere else to go and nothing else to do, so I might as well be useful." She met his gaze steadily. "Besides, I know what it's like to watch everything slip away. My father lost our farm 3 years ago. He died of a broken heart 6 months later. If I can help you save yours, I'd like to try." Something shifted in Daniel's chest at her words. He nodded slowly. "We'll see how you feel in the morning. If you think you can manage, even light work would help." That night, Daniel lay awake in his own bed, listening to the wind rustle through the wheat and thinking about the strange turn his day had taken. He had woken up alone and facing disaster. Now, there was a woman sleeping in his spare room, a woman who had known loss and understood desperation, who looked at his fields with appreciation and offered help when she was the one who needed it. He did not know what to make of Katherine Emerson. Morning came with the pale pink light of dawn, and Daniel rose as he always did, with the first hint of sun on the horizon. He was surprised to find Katherine already awake, standing at his kitchen pump in a fresh dress, trying awkwardly to work the handle with one hand. "Here, let me," he said, moving quickly to help her. "Thank you." She stepped back, color rising in her cheeks. "I wanted to make myself useful, but apparently I can't even manage water." "You're injured. There's no shame in needing help." He pumped the water for her, then started building up the fire in the stove. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Sore," she admitted, "but better than yesterday." The rest helped. They worked together to make breakfast, a simple meal of eggs from Daniel's small henhouse and more cornbread. Katherine moved carefully but capably, and Daniel found himself watching the way the morning light caught in her auburn hair, the way she bit her lower lip slightly when she concentrated on a task. "Tell me about the harvest," she said as they ate. "What needs to be done first?" Daniel explained the process: cutting the wheat, bundling it into sheaves, shocking the sheaves to let them dry, then hauling them to the barn for threshing. It was back-breaking work that required speed and precision. Every day that passed meant the risk of weather damage increased, of the grain shattering and falling to the ground, of all his effort going to waste. "I can bind sheaves," Katherine said thoughtfully. "That doesn't require two good hands, just one hand and a knee to hold the wheat while I tie it. And I could help with the shocking, stacking them properly. That's still hard work." "I'm tougher than I look, Mr. Keller." "Daniel," he said, "if we're going to be working together, you should call me Daniel." She smiled then, the first real smile he had seen from her, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. "Daniel it is." They started that very day. Daniel cut the wheat with his scythe, powerful strokes that laid the golden stalks in neat rows. Katherine followed behind him, kneeling carefully to gather the wheat with her good hand and her knee, wrapping twine around each bundle with practiced efficiency despite her injury. It was slow going, much slower than if he had a full crew, but it was progress. The sun climbed higher, and the heat became oppressive. Daniel called for a break, and they retreated to the shade of the single large cottonwood tree that grew near his well. He drew up fresh cold water and they passed the dipper between them, too tired to talk much. "You're good at this," Daniel finally said. "You weren't exaggerating about growing up on a farm." "I spent most of my childhood in fields like these," Katherine replied, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her good hand. "My father grew corn and wheat both. I learned to work as soon as I was tall enough to reach the stalks." "What made you come west? You said something about a cousin." Katherine's expression grew distant. "After my father died, my mother remarried. Her new husband didn't want me around. He made that very clear. My cousin Martha had written that she had a good situation here in South Dakota, working as a teacher, and she invited me to come live with her and help at the school. It seemed like a good opportunity, a chance to start over." She laughed bitterly. "I should have written ahead to confirm. Instead, I sold everything I had to buy a wagon and supplies and made the journey alone, only to find that Martha left for Montana 6 months ago." "I'm sorry," Daniel said, and he meant it. "So am I. But feeling sorry for myself won't change anything. At least here with you, I have a purpose for now. That's more than I had yesterday." They worked until the sun began to set, then stumbled back to the house, both exhausted. Daniel heated water for washing while Katherine set out a cold supper of bread and cheese, neither of them having energy for proper cooking. They ate in companionable silence, too tired for conversation. Over the next several days, they fell into a rhythm. Daniel would rise before dawn and start work while Katherine prepared a quick breakfast. They would work the fields together until the heat of midday drove them to rest, then resume in the late afternoon. The wheat slowly came in, bundle by bundle, shock by shock. Daniel found himself noticing things about Katherine that had nothing to do with her work. The way she hummed while she tied sheaves, old folk songs that reminded him of his mother. The way she looked at the sunset, pausing in her work to appreciate the beauty of the sky painted in oranges and pinks. The way she never complained, even though he could see the pain in her eyes when she thought he wasn't watching. One evening, about a week into their work, they sat together on his porch after supper, watching the stars come out. The night air was cooler, a relief after the blazing heat of the day. "I've been thinking," Katherine said quietly, "about what I'll do when the harvest is done." Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. He had been trying not to think about that. "Any ideas?" "I could try to find work in Hill City. Maybe the school needs help, or there might be a family looking for a housekeeper. Or I could try to make my way to Montana, find Martha and see if her offer still stands." "Those are all possibilities," Daniel said, though none of them sat well with him. The thought of Katherine leaving, of the house being empty again, filled him with an unexpected sense of loss. Or, Katherine continued, and he heard something uncertain in her voice, I could stay here, if you needed a partner, not just for the harvest but for the long term. Daniel turned to look at her in the darkness. What are you saying? I'm saying that I like it here. I like the work, the land, the quiet, I like. She trailed off, then seemed to gather her courage. I like working with you, Daniel. These past days have been hard, but they've also been good. We work well together. His heart was pounding now. Katherine, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I'm suggesting a partnership, a real one. You need help with the farm and I need a home. We could make it legal, proper. A marriage of convenience that would benefit us both. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his mind racing. The practical part of him recognized the sense in what she was saying. A farm this size really needed two people to run it properly. Having a partner would make everything easier, more stable. But there was another part of him, a part that had been growing stronger every day he spent with Katherine, that wanted more than just a practical arrangement. What if it became more than convenient? He finally asked. He saw her silhouette turn toward him in the darkness. What do you mean? I mean that I've come to care for you, Katherine, more than I probably should have in just a week. I think you're remarkable, strong and capable and kind. If we were to marry, I wouldn't want it to be just a business arrangement. I'd want a real marriage, a real partnership in every sense. The silence stretched between them, and Daniel held his breath, wondering if he had overstepped, if he had misread the situation entirely. Then Katherine reached out with her good hand and found his in the darkness. Her fingers were calloused from work, warm and real. I've come to care for you too, she said softly. I didn't expect to. I came here broken and lost, and you've given me hope again. These days working beside you, I've felt more alive than I have in years. So yes, Daniel Keller, yes to a partnership, yes to a real marriage. Yes to building a life together here. Daniel squeezed her hand, hardly daring to believe what was happening. A week ago, he had been alone and desperate. Now he was holding hands with a woman who made his heart race, making plans for a future that suddenly looked bright with possibility. They sat there for a long time, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel overhead, both of them thinking about the strange paths that had brought them to this moment. The next morning, Daniel drove them into Hill City to speak with Reverend Michaels. The Reverend was an older man with kind eyes and a practical nature shaped by years of frontier ministry. He listened to their story without judgment. This is quick, he observed. Are you both certain? I am, Daniel said firmly. So am I, Katherine added. I know it seems sudden, but sometimes you just know when something is right. This feels right. The Reverend studied them both for a moment, then nodded. I've seen marriages founded on less than what you two have. You've worked together, faced hardship together. That's more than many couples have when they stand before me. If you're both willing to commit to each other and to making this marriage work, I'll perform the ceremony. They were married 3 days later in the small church at the edge of Hill City, with Doc Hensley and his wife standing as witnesses. Katherine wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Hensley had loaned her, and Daniel wore his only good suit. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Daniel kissed Katherine gently, aware that her ribs were still tender but wanting to seal their vows properly. Afterward, they returned to the farm together, this time as man and wife. The harvest still waited, but now it felt different. Now they were working not just to save Daniel's farm, but to build their shared future. The work continued, harder now as they pushed to finish before the weather could turn. Katherine's wrist had healed enough that she could use it more, though it still ached at the end of long days. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, cutting and bundling and shocking wheat until Daniel's small barn was full and they had to start stacking sheaves in the yard under tarps. In the evenings, they would wash up and share supper, then sit together on the porch. Those moments became Daniel's favorite part of the day. They would talk about everything and nothing. Katherine told him about growing up in Ohio, about her parents and the farm they had lost. Daniel spoke of Pennsylvania and his family, of the dreams that had brought him west one night. About 2 weeks after their wedding, Daniel worked up the courage to ask something that had been on his mind. "Are you happy, Katherine? Truly happy?" She looked at him in surprise. "What makes you ask that?" "I just want to make sure you don't feel trapped, that this marriage is what you really want, not just what circumstance pushed you into." Katherine set down the sock she had been darning and took his hand. "Daniel Keller, I am happier than I've been in years. Do I wish we had met under better circumstances? Perhaps. Do I wish we had had more time to court properly? Maybe, but I don't regret a single moment of our marriage. You're a good man, and I'm grateful every day that Doc Hensley brought me to your door." Daniel pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. She settled against him with a contented sigh, and they sat that way until the stars came out, just being together. As September arrived, the harvest was nearly complete. The last of the wheat had been cut and shocked, and now came the task of threshing. Daniel had arranged to borrow a neighbor's threshing machine, and several local farmers came to help, as was the custom. In return, Daniel would help with their harvests when needed. Katherine worked alongside the other farm wives, cooking for the crew and hauling water. Daniel watched her laugh at something Mrs. Anderson said, saw how easily she fit in with the other women, and felt a surge of pride and affection. She belonged here. They belonged together. The threshing took 3 long days, but when it was done, Daniel had enough grain to pay his debts, buy supplies for the winter, and still have seed left over for next year's planting. He was going to make it. They were going to make it. That night, after everyone had gone home, Daniel swept Katherine up in his arms and spun her around, making her laugh and protest about her ribs. "We did it," he said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "We actually did it, we did," she agreed, her eyes shining. "Together." He kissed her then, really kissed her, not the gentle pecks they had shared before, but a deep, passionate kiss that spoke of all the feelings he had been holding back. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Katherine was blushing but smiling. "I love you," Daniel said, the words tumbling out. "I know it's only been a few weeks, but I love you, Katherine. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." "I love you too," she whispered back. "I think I started falling for you that first day, when you took me in even though you had every reason to say no. You have the kindest heart of any man I've ever known." That night marked a turning point in their marriage. Before, they had been partners, friends, companions. Now they became truly husband and wife in every sense, their love deepening into something real and lasting. As autumn progressed, they worked together to prepare the farm for winter. They harvested the vegetables from Katherine's newly planted garden, put up preserves, and repaired the barn roof. Daniel taught Katherine to shoot, and she became quite proficient with his rifle, good enough to bring down a deer that would provide meat through the cold months. In November, Daniel made a trip to the nearest town with a proper mercantile and returned with supplies and a surprise. He pulled out a bolt of beautiful green fabric and handed it to Katherine. "For a new dress," he said. "I know the one you've been wearing is getting worn." Katherine's eyes filled with tears as she touched the soft material. "Daniel, this is too much. We need to save money for what? We've paid the debts. We have seed for spring. We have food laid by. I wanted to get you something nice, something just for you," he smiled. Besides, I want my wife to have a pretty dress for the town Christmas social." She threw her arms around him, careful of the fabric between them. "Thank you. You're too good to me." "Never," he said, kissing the top of her head. "You deserve everything good in this world." Winter settled over the South Dakota prairie with snow and bitter cold. The farm work slowed, giving them more time together indoors. Katherine sewed her new dress and mended their clothes while Daniel carved and repaired tools. They read aloud to each other in the evenings from the few books they owned, Katherine's clear voice bringing stories to life. It was during one of these quiet evenings in January that Katherine brought up something that had been on her mind. "Daniel, I've been thinking about next year's planting. What if we expanded the wheat fields by another 20 acres? We could handle that together, and the extra crop would give us a real cushion." Daniel looked up from the harness he was mending. "That's a big undertaking. Are you sure you want to commit to that much work?" "I'm sure. This farm is our future. I want to help build it into something substantial, something we can be proud of and maybe pass down someday." "Pass down?" Daniel felt his heart skip. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Katherine blushed. "Not yet, but hopefully soon. I want children, Daniel. I want a family. But even if we're blessed with children, I still want to be a full partner in running this farm. My mother always said a farm wife should know every aspect of the operation, and I agree." Daniel set aside his work and moved to kneel beside her chair. "You're an amazing woman, Katherine Keller. Most men would be lucky to have a wife half as capable as you." "Then it's settled. We'll expand." "It's settled. We'll plan it out properly, maybe talk to some of the other farmers about the best way to approach it. But yes, we'll expand together." The Christmas social that year was a revelation to Daniel. He had attended these gatherings before, always feeling somewhat apart from the married couples and families that made up most of the community. Now he arrived with Katherine on his arm, her green dress making her eyes glow, and felt a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. They danced together, Katherine teaching him steps she had learned back in Ohio. They shared a meal with their neighbors and joined in singing carols. More than once, Daniel caught other men watching Katherine with admiration, and he felt a possessive pride that she was his wife, that she had chosen him. On the way home, bundled under blankets in the wagon, Katherine leaned against Daniel's shoulder. "That was wonderful. Thank you for taking me. Thank you for coming, for being here, for everything." He paused, then added, "I know I've said it before, but you've changed my life, Katherine. A year ago, I was just surviving, working alone and wondering if it was all worth it. Now I have a reason to build something lasting. I have you." She tilted her face up and kissed him, cold nose bumping against his. "And I have you. I went from having nothing and nowhere to having a home and a husband I love. I'm the lucky one." Winter slowly gave way to spring, and with the thaw came the work of preparing for a new season. True to their plan, Daniel and Katherine worked together to clear and prepare an additional 20 acres for planting. It was grueling work, but they tackled it with determination and good humor. In April, Katherine realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be certain before telling Daniel, choosing a moment when they had just finished planting the wheat fields. "I have something to tell you," she said as they walked back to the house at sunset, both covered in dirt and exhausted. "What is it?" Daniel asked, hearing something special in her tone. "I'm expecting a baby. We're going to be parents." Daniel stopped dead in his tracks, then let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to Hill City. He picked Katherine up and spun her around, then set her down quickly, suddenly worried. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. Are you all right? Is the baby all right?" Katherine laughed, her face radiant. "We're fine. I'm only a few months along. But you're going to have to stop spinning me around soon." "A baby," Daniel said wonderingly, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Katherine, I'm so happy I could burst." "Me too," she said softly. "I always dreamed of having a family of my own, a real home. And now that dream is coming true." The months that followed were busy ones. The wheat grew tall and green, and Katherine's belly grew round. Daniel fussed over her constantly, worried she was working too hard, but Katherine insisted on maintaining her usual pace, though she did let Daniel take over the heavier tasks. In June, they received unexpected visitors. A wagon pulled into their yard and a woman called out, "Katherine." "Katherine Emerson." "Oh my Lord, is that really you?" Katherine came out of the house, one hand on her lower back, and stared in shock. "Martha, Martha, what are you doing here?" The woman jumped down from the wagon, followed by a tall man with a beard. "I came as soon as I heard you were in Hill City. I'm so sorry I wasn't here when you arrived. I sent letters, but they must have gone astray. Oh, Katherine, I felt terrible when I heard what happened." The two women embraced, and Daniel watched as Katherine introduced him as her husband. Martha's eyes went wide when she saw Katherine's pregnant belly. "Husband, and a baby on the way. Katherine, tell me everything." They invited Martha and her own husband, Robert, in for supper, and the evening was spent catching up. Martha explained that she had gone to Montana for what was supposed to be a temporary teaching position, but had ended up staying when she met and married Robert. She had only recently returned to South Dakota to settle some legal matters and had been shocked to hear from Doc Hensley about Katherine's accident. "If I had known you were coming, I never would have left without making sure you knew," Martha said, distress evident in her voice. "Can you forgive me?" "There's nothing to forgive," Katherine assured her. "If you hadn't gone, I wouldn't have ended up here with Daniel. Everything worked out exactly as it was meant to." When Martha and Robert finally left, promising to stay in touch, Daniel pulled Katherine close. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if your cousin had been here when you arrived?" "Sometimes," Katherine admitted, "but only in an abstract way. I can't imagine my life without you now, Daniel. Even if I could go back and change things, I wouldn't. This is where I'm meant to be." The harvest that year was even more successful than the previous one. With the expanded fields and good weather, Daniel and Katherine brought in enough wheat to put away a substantial savings and make improvements to the farm. Daniel hired help for the harvest this time, not wanting Katherine to overexert herself in her advanced pregnancy. In October, on a cool morning when the leaves were turning gold and red, Katherine's labor began. Doc Hensley was summoned, along with Mrs. Anderson and several other experienced farm wives. Daniel paced outside, his heart in his throat, listening to Katherine's cries and praying for her safety. After what felt like an eternity but was actually only about 6 hours, Doc Hensley emerged with a smile. "You have a son, Daniel. A healthy, strong boy. And Katherine did beautifully. She's tired but well." Daniel rushed inside to find Katherine propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted but glowing with joy. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets, a red, wrinkled face peeking out. "Meet your son," Katherine said softly. "What should we name him?" Daniel sat carefully on the edge of the bed, looking down at his child in wonder. "I was thinking Thomas, after my father, Thomas Keller." "Thomas," Katherine repeated, smiling. "I like it. Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the world, little one." Daniel stayed by Katherine's side all that day and night, unable to tear himself away from his wife and newborn son. He had thought he understood happiness before, but this was something else entirely. This was complete and total contentment, a sense that his life was exactly as it should be. As Thomas grew, the farm prospered. Daniel and Katherine worked as a team, balancing childcare with farm duties. Katherine proved to be as capable a mother as she was a farmer, and Daniel was a devoted father, often working with Thomas strapped to his back in a sling Katherine made. When Thomas was 2 years old, Katherine became pregnant again, and this time their daughter Sarah was born on a bright spring morning in 1887. The little girl had her mother's auburn hair and green eyes, and she quickly wrapped both her parents and her brother around her tiny fingers. The farm continued to expand. Daniel and Katherine were respected members of the Hill City community, known for their hard work and generosity. When other farmers faced hardship, Daniel and Katherine were quick to offer help, remembering the desperation Daniel had felt that summer before Katherine arrived. One evening, when Thomas was 5 and Sarah was 3, the family sat together on the porch watching the sunset. The wheat fields stretched out before them, golden and full. The farmhouse had been expanded with an additional room, and the barn had been rebuilt larger and sturdier. "You ever think about that first day?" Katherine asked, watching the children play in the yard. "When Doc Hensley brought me here, all the time," Daniel said, taking her hand. "I think about how desperate I was, how close I came to losing everything. And then you arrived, hurt and stranded and just as desperate as I was. We saved each other, Katherine." "We did," she agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I came here looking for a place to belong, and I found so much more. I found a home, a purpose, a family. I found love." "I was just looking for someone to help with the harvest," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "Instead, I found a partner for my whole life. The best partner I could have ever hoped for." Thomas came running up to the porch. "Papa, can you tell us the story again, about how you and Mama met?" Daniel laughed and pulled the boy onto his lap while Katherine lifted Sarah up. "Well, it was the summer of 1883, and I needed help with the harvest. I needed it so badly I thought I might lose everything." As Daniel told the story, Katherine watched her family with a full heart. She thought about the frightened, lost woman she had been, traveling alone to a place where no one waited for her, her wagon overturning and leaving her injured and stranded. At the time, it had seemed like the worst thing that could happen. Now she saw it for what it really was, the beginning of her real life. The years continued to pass, bringing more changes and challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers, lean years and abundant ones. Through it all, Daniel and Katherine faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing season. When Thomas was 10, he began taking on real responsibilities around the farm, learning from his father how to care for the land and the crops. Sarah, too, proved to be a hard worker, helping her mother with the garden and the chickens and learning to cook and preserve food. In 1892, Katherine gave birth to their third and final child, another son they named David. By this time, the farm had become one of the most successful in the area, and the Keller family was well established in the community. Daniel often reflected on how different his life had turned out from what he had expected. When he had come west from Pennsylvania, he had envisioned a solitary life, working his land alone and making his own way. He had never imagined the richness that family would bring, the joy of sharing his days with someone he loved, of raising children together and building something that would last beyond his own lifetime. One autumn evening in 1895, after the harvest was in and the children were all asleep, Daniel and Katherine sat together on their porch as they had done countless times before. They were both in their late 30s now, their faces showing the lines and weathering of years of hard work under the prairie sun, but their love had only deepened with time. 12 years, Katherine said softly. "It's been 12 years since that day." "Best 12 years of my life," Daniel replied. Sometimes I still can't believe how lucky I was. If I hadn't needed help with that harvest, if Doc Hensley hadn't brought you to me, if you hadn't offered to work despite being injured, if any one of a dozen things had been different." "But they weren't different," Katherine interrupted gently. "Everything happened exactly as it needed to. I believe that, Daniel. I believe we were meant to find each other." "So do I," he agreed, pulling her close. "You know what I'm most grateful for? It's not just that you saved the farm that year, though you did. It's not even the children as much as I love them. It's that every single day I get to wake up next to you. Every day I get to work alongside you, eat meals with you, share my thoughts and dreams with you. You're my best friend, Katherine, my partner in everything. I love you more now than I did the day we married." Katherine turned to kiss him, her eyes bright with tears. "And I love you. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go, but more than that, you gave me respect and partnership and love. You never treated me as less than equal, never made me feel like I was just your helper. We've built this life together, truly together." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the wind rustle through the wheat stubble and watching the stars come out. "What do you think the future holds for us?" Katherine finally asked. Daniel considered the question. "I think we'll keep doing what we've been doing. Working hard, raising our children, taking care of this land. Maybe someday Thomas will take over the farm, or maybe he'll want to forge his own path. Either way, we'll support him and his siblings in whatever they choose. And we'll do it together," Katherine added. "Always together," Daniel confirmed. As the years rolled on into the new century, the Keller farm remained a thriving operation. Thomas grew into a strong young man and eventually did decide to stay on the farm, taking on more and more of the physical labor as Daniel aged. Sarah met and married a kind young man from a neighboring farm, and they built their own home nearby. David, the youngest, showed an aptitude for figures and business and eventually became involved in the financial side of the farm operations. But through all the changes, Daniel and Katherine remained the heart of the family and the farm. They were the ones the children came to for advice, the ones who maintained the traditions and passed on the stories. They had weathered storms both literal and figurative together, and their bond had only grown stronger. In 1903, on a warm summer evening 20 years after Katherine had first arrived at Daniel's farm, the extended family gathered for a celebration. It was Thomas's 21st birthday, and also a celebration of 2 decades of the Keller family farm. As Daniel looked around at the gathering, his heart swelled with pride and gratitude. There was Thomas, now a man, standing tall and confident. Sarah, with her husband and their first baby. David, almost 13, already showing signs of the man he would become. And there, at the center of it all, was Katherine, her auburn hair now streaked with silver, her face lined but still beautiful, her green eyes still sharp and bright. She caught his gaze and smiled, that same smile that had captivated him all those years ago. She made her way over to him, slipping her hand into his. "A penny for your thoughts," she said. "I was just thinking about how blessed I am," Daniel replied. "How blessed we are. Look at what we've built, Katherine. Not just the farm, but the family, the life. It's more than I ever dreamed possible." "It's more than either of us dreamed," Katherine agreed. "But we did it together. That's always been our secret, Daniel. We're stronger together than we ever could have been apart." Thomas called for everyone's attention, and the family gathered around. He raised his glass of cider in a toast. "To my parents, Daniel and Katherine Keller. 20 years ago, they came together in a time of need and built something amazing. They've shown us all what true partnership looks like, what real love is. Everything good in my life, in all our lives, comes from their example. To Mama and Papa. To Mama and Papa." The family echoed, raising their own glasses. Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. He raised his glass in acknowledgement, then turned to Katherine. "To us," he said quietly. "To the harvest that brought us together and the life we've built." "To us," Katherine repeated, her eyes shining with love and happiness. As the celebration continued around them, Daniel reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He thought about that desperate summer day when he had stood in his wheat fields wondering how he would manage alone. He thought about the moment Katherine had been brought to his door, hurt and lost. He thought about their wedding, their first harvest together, the births of their children, all the struggles and triumphs they had shared. He had needed a partner for the harvest. Instead, he had found a partner for his whole life, a love that had transformed everything he thought he knew about happiness and fulfillment. Katherine had not just helped him save his farm that first year. She had given him a reason to build something lasting, something meaningful. And as he looked at his wife, surrounded by their children and grandchild, he knew with absolute certainty that every challenge they had faced had been worth it. Every moment of hardship had been balanced by 100 moments of joy. The love they shared had created a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. The farm would endure. The family would grow. But at the foundation of it all would always be the story of a desperate cowboy and a stranded woman who had found each other when they both needed saving, who had chosen to build a life together, and who had discovered that love and partnership could transform even the hardest circumstances into something beautiful. As the sun set over the wheat fields, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Daniel pulled Katherine close and kissed her gently. A kiss that held 20 years of love and devotion, of shared struggles and triumphs, of a partnership that had proven stronger than either of them could have imagined. They had started with nothing but hope and determination. They had built a life, a family, a legacy. And they had done it together, every step of the way, true partners in every sense of the word. The harvest that had brought them together had long since been gathered, but what they had planted together continued to grow and flourish. Their love was the richest crop of all, yielding abundance year after year, season after season, providing nourishment not just for themselves but for their children and their children's children. As night fell and the family began to disperse, heading to their various homes, Daniel and Katherine walked hand in hand back to the farmhouse they had shared for 2 decades. The house was quiet now, with only David still living at home, and the silence was comfortable, familiar. They prepared for bed together, a routine refined over years of practice. When they finally lay down together, Katherine curled against Daniel's side as she had done thousands of times before. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Daniel asked, though he thought he knew. "For taking me in that day, for giving me a chance, for loving me, for this whole wonderful life." Daniel tightened his arm around her. "I should be thanking you. You saved me, Katherine. In every way a person can be saved. I love you so much it sometimes frightens me." "Don't be frightened," she said softly. "We have years and years ahead of us still. More harvests to bring in, more memories to make. I'm not going anywhere." "Promise?" Daniel asked, half joking, half serious. "Promise," Katherine replied firmly. "We're partners, remember. For the whole journey, whatever comes." They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the love they had built and the life they shared. Outside, the wind whispered through the wheat fields and the stars wheeled overhead, marking the passage of time. The years ahead would bring their own challenges and joys. There would be more grandchildren, more changes to the farm and the world around them. But through it all, Daniel and Katherine would face everything together, just as they always had. They had needed each other that first summer, needed the help and partnership that saved them both from desperation. But what had begun as need had transformed into something far greater, a love that sustained them through all of life's seasons, a partnership that made them both stronger and better than they could have been alone. Daniel had needed a partner for the harvest. Katherine had needed a place to belong. What they found was so much more than either had sought. They found love, family, purpose, and meaning. They found home in each other's arms and built a legacy that would endure for generations. And on quiet evenings, when they sat together on their porch watching the sun set over their fields, they would sometimes look at each other and smile, remembering that first desperate summer and marveling at how beautifully everything had turned out. They would hold hands and talk about the day's events, making plans for tomorrow, secure in the knowledge that whatever came, they would face it together. The cowboy had found his partner, not just for a single harvest, but for all the harvests of their lives. And in finding each other, they had discovered what it meant to be truly home, truly loved, truly complete. Their story was one of hope and resilience, of taking chances and opening hearts, of building something beautiful from desperate circumstances. It was a love story that would be told and retold by their descendants, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come not from careful planning, but from being open to possibility, from helping others when they need it most, and from recognizing love when it arrives, even if it comes in an unexpected package on an ordinary August day in South Dakota. Daniel and Katherine Keller had built a life together that was richer and fuller than either had imagined possible. They had faced hardship and found joy, worked hard and reaped rewards, given love and received it in abundance. And at the end of each day, they had each other, which made everything else worthwhile. The harvest that brought them together was long past, but the fruit of their partnership continued to nourish everyone around them. Their love was the foundation upon which everything else was built, strong and enduring and true. And as they grew old together, surrounded by the family and life they had created, they knew without doubt that they were blessed beyond measure, that their greatest harvest had been finding each other, and that their love would endure long after the last wheat was gathered, a legacy as golden and lasting as the prairie sun.